Well, I can speak now to Rob Neal in London, a diversity and inclusion consultant at the Reach Society, an association of black professionals. Good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. So what is your view on the removal of statues linked to slavery or colonialism? I mean, does their removal actually address the core issues of racism today?
Well, and thanks for having me on. These are personal views I share. I don't think it addresses the core issue, but it's a sign and an indication of what people feel about these issues. I think it's an early sign. I think it's one that we need to pay attention to. People aren't, given to these acts just like that. There's a real groundswell, a real momentum now to pay attention to these symbols. And they are just symbols. I agree with Marvin. They are limited in what they can do, but we have to move past that and deal with the actual root causes. And as you say, the core issue is about the systemic issues in play that disadvantage groups of people.
Yeah, and I totally understand the anger, but these figures, these statues, are of historical people who acted in accordance with their times. They were the product of the standards back then, which are clearly, are very different to the standards of today. So what do you make of the argument that taking them down is simply an attempt to erase a complex history of our country?
Well, for some people, the history cannot be erased. They remain impacted today. And when you say standards, whose standards? I'm sure if you went back to those times, if that were possible, and asked the children of those that were subject to enslavement, if you asked the extended families of those that were slaves themselves, those weren't their standards. Those were, by any standards, inhumane acts to take and tear a people from one land and forcibly move them to another. By anybody's standards that you care about are wrong. And so if in an enlightened time today we can research and know that for a fact, just as we know about certain other stains on our history, like the Holocaust, for example, which we know is now a part of the curriculum in the UK, why not then, should we not extend that same feeling, that same understanding, that same enlightenment to these other issues that are clearly a stain on our history? It's not about erasing history.
I agree that education on these issues is absolutely paramount. But where do you draw the line? And who makes the decision? I mean, for example, the argument over the statue of Winston Churchill, for example, whether that should be taken down. Who decides what should stay and what should go?
Well, I think you're hearing decisions being made by people. You're hearing people who live in those spaces, who occupy those spaces and feel what goes on, who feels it, knows it. And I think part of a democracy is listening to those people. So when you talk about who decides, we can decide at the ballot box. I absolutely and personally think that there should be a proactive measure about removing these statues, these symbols from a time that really all of us can look at and see the inhumanity in it. And so when you talk about who decides and where do we draw the line, I think what we have to understand in a democratic society is that people are telling us how they feel about these symbols. They are telling us by acts that took place. And whilst regrettable that it should be done in such a way, I would much rather it was done proactively and we went around with a real system and a schedule to remove these awful symbols of a past that has a stain on our history. It is important that we listen to what people who are living these experiences are having to say.
Good to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed. Rob Neal there, live from London.